Jack, how you doing?
I'm good. You all right?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. And good morning to everyone watching. Welcome to episode 4 already of the RG Classroom. Where does the time go? I guess time flies when you're having fun. But yeah, welcome to episode 4, which we have entitled Freehold, Leasehold. What does it all mean? So I'm going to hand over to Jack to introduce today's episode. Jack?
Yes. And thanks, Mike. And also, just to touch on, as we say at the beginning of every episode, thank you for your continued support. As Mike says, I can't believe it's episode 4, which is really great. But yeah, thank you for your comments. Keep them coming thick and fast. We've had some good feedback, and we welcome feedback in every form. So if you like them, please let us know. If you don't, please let us know. So thanks to everyone for making contact and stuff. So yes, welcome to episode 4. So there's different ways to buy a property, basically. So Mike and I were doing some research. We didn't have anyone that kind of messaged in to say they wanted us to do a specific subject this week. So we decided to do something a little bit more kind of, I wouldn't say interesting, but a bit more kind of what we deal with lots more, rather than what you might do as a first-time buyer or something. And obviously, again, if you are experienced in buying property, of course you're going to know all of this, but this is kind of a way of us keeping in touch with you if you want this information and you need it. So yeah, there's several different ways to buy properties. You might have, I'm sure that you've watched kind of property videos and you've seen like auctions and the normal going into an estate agent, buying from an online agent maybe. There's so many different ways and routes to go along to actually buy a property, but there's also different ways to buy a property when you're actually purchasing it, and the way of purchasing it. You might be buying it as jointly with someone. You might be buying it on your own. It might be a shared ownership, and different ways as well, like help to buy and all that kind of stuff. So these are all things that we will elaborate on as the episodes go on. So yeah, that's kind of what we want to talk about today. So I think the two big things that always come up is kind of freehold and leasehold, and quite a lot of people ask us about what that means. To kind of break it down, it really depends on what type of property you're buying. It depends on what type of property you're looking for. So leaseholds come with an actual lease attached to it, and there'll be a freeholder that owns the actual freehold, but you'll buy the lease of the property, which will be a duration over a number of years. The freehold property is basically lock, stock and barrel, so you own the property outright. You don't have any sort of service charge. Well, you could have maintenance charges if you live on a little sort of private road or something like that, but you won't have a lease attached to it. You won't pay ground rent. So it's a little bit more leasehold purchases
are traditional, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, if we start with, sorry, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Sorry, no. I was going to say, yeah. If we break that down, so yeah. So starting, as Jack said, with freehold. So your freehold is your very traditional. You own the house, the land it sits on, your garden, your plot, your parking spaces, your driveway, etc., etc. And what we mean by freehold is, as I think Jack described it greatly in an email to me last night, was lock, stock, and barrel. You own the full thing. You're not beholden to anyone technically. You are beholden obviously to laws and planning permissions and what have you, but you own the property as a whole. So any changes you want to make to it, you can make to it. You don't have to pay any leases. But the flip side of that with a freehold property is it does come with its sort of financial demands from a point of view of, with a leasehold property, if the roof goes, it'll be the freeholder's responsibility to sort it out. In a freehold house, like I'm sitting in now, like Jack's sitting in, if there's a problem with the roof or a structural wall or a fence blows down or anything like that, the responsibility is on me or Jack, or if you own a freehold property, on you as the freeholder. But it gives you that freedom, and that's why a lot of the times owning a freehold property is fantastic, because you've got that freedom to go and do, do what you like. If you want to put a trellis fence up, a 6-foot close boarded fence up, if you want to paint the fence blue, you can do all of those things. So freeholding, being a freeholder, gives you that sense of freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, leasehold equally, it's not a negative. A lot of flats, you do get some freehold flats, but a lot of flats are I'd say 90% are leasehold. So it kind of makes more sense when you're buying a flat, because as Mike says, when you own a property lock, stock and barrel, it's quite black and white. You know that that's your garden, that's your area. Whereas in a flat, you've got kind of communal hallways, you've got staircases, you've got lifts, all those things. So it would be very difficult. You can have a share of the freehold, which again we can elaborate later on, but it would be very difficult for, or unfair even for one person to manage all of that. So it's broken down into leases. So basically with a leasehold, you don't own the ground that's on, the freeholder does. So you will have a lease. And it can be costly, as Mike says. So you might have, some properties they can run down in the lease. So you might have a very, very long lease, or you might have a short lease when you're buying something of say 50 years or something like that. So you would need to extend that lease, which can be quite difficult when you're purchasing a property, because you have to own a property for 2 years as a minimum before you can actually extend that lease. So it might be that, and a lot of mortgage lenders would frown upon a short lease. I think the last I heard, 50 years or something, but I don't know if that's still.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I would always recommend if you're looking at a property and on Rightmove, Zoopla, our website, wherever you're looking, if it says that it's a leasehold property, the first question you want to be asking the agent when you want to view or come to view is some information about that lease. Starting with, as Jack said, the length of the lease. That's huge, is knowing how long that lease is, how long it's got to run. As Jack was saying there, leases traditionally around about 99 years. They can be 199, they can be 999 years long. The shorter the lease, the more risk there is with the property when it comes to mortgage lending. So it's really vital that you ask that question straight off: how long is left on the lease, and get that information. But also with a lease, when you're buying, as Jack was about to explain, so I'll hand back over to him as I rudely interrupted, was the fact that they come with costs attached to them. So there will be service charge and ground rent. Now, ground rents are usually quite not hugely expensive and are paid annually, but it's the service charge that's important to know about. And the service charge for the freeholder, for the leaseholder, they pay goes towards things like Jack was speaking about: cleaning the communal areas, looking after any maintenance that needs to be done. So it's really important that you ask for those details on how long that lease is, but also what service charge, because that will build into your affordability.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing with maintenance charges and service charges. It's, if there is I remember a flat that I'd sold a long time ago, and the service charges there was something like £4,200 a year, which is a huge cost. By the time you weigh in your mortgage that you're paying, your ground rent, as Mike says, your council tax, and then you bulk this nigh on £4,500 at the end of the year. It's a huge amount of money. So it's really important to find out what those costs are, as Mike says. And about that lease length, I think that's a really key point, Mike, because there isn't, I think I'm right in saying there isn't actually a kind of legal cap on what a freeholder can charge for extending the lease. So it can be phenomenal amounts of money. So that's one thing to really look into. So not that we're trying to say it's better to buy a freehold property. It certainly isn't. It's just, whatever works for you. And leases work for a lot of people. They really do. So it's nice to have, the weight taken off, that that things are going, the garden's going to be cut. It's nice that the roof's covered and it's not you that's looking after it all. So from a financial point of view, there's lots and lots of positives. It's just about getting the facts and figures and knowing actually what is entailed, what within that lease, what are you restricted to, what are you allowed to do, and it might be that you're not allowed pets, it might be that you're not allowed to do certain things, as Mike says, put trellises up or personalize your outside space. So it's really key to kind of find out about those things. And also, that, it does go a lot deeper. There are sinking funds and stuff. So it really is important to really ask lots and lots of questions. Your solicitor will help with that anyway at that time when you're purchasing. But really do quiz the agent, because there's it's really important for the agent to know those things in and out when they're marketing a particular property. What that lease, what's involved with that lease, basically. Yeah. So that's a really key thing.
I think you're right. I mean, as an agent, when we're selling a freehold property, the house I'm in, a very standard 3-bedroom freehold property. We know as an agent, there it is. There's your boundary lines. There's what you own. Here's what you're going to own when you purchase. There's I guess it's quite a minefield with a leasehold property because there's so much that goes into it. So as Jack said, and as we touched upon, length of the lease, service charges. So just to jump in, Jack, just to jump in on a couple of things you said there, could you explain sinking fund just to start off with? You use that phrase just so viewers know what we're on about there.
There are, you'll pay a certain amount, as Mike says, on your maintenance or your service charge. So it might be that you pay, let's say, for example, £200 a month. Now, that £200 a month might not be used every month. Sometimes it is, it's used on gardening. Sometimes there's buildings insurance included, and certain things. So it might be that amount's used, but often, more often than not, there's a kind of overhaul of money that keeps coming in. So there's a small amount that comes out, but there's that fund that carries on. So that will basically be held, usually by a management company. That there'll be a chunk of money basically. So as Mike says, if the roof needs replacing on a block of flats, it's going to be a tremendous amount of money. So you kind of want to know that, one, is that roof in good order? And if it isn't, is there a sinking fund in place when you buy that property? Because what you don't want to do is to, if there isn't a sinking fund, for example, and something big needs doing, windows need replacing or whatever, that money isn't there to cover that. So the sinking fund is almost like a savings pot really for the leaseholders. I guess that's the easy way to describe it, but not all, not always are they there. So again, that's a really key one to check with the agent and make sure that there is that in place. And if there isn't, how do they go about doing it? What happens? Is it split? Who covers what? So it's really, really key to dig deep with that information, because it can be quite if it goes.
And it's a mistake even me as an agent I made when I bought my first flat, which was share of freehold, which again we'll go into shortly. But when I bought it, there was no formal service charge in place and there was no formal sinking fund. Within, I think it was about 3 or 4 months of moving in, work needed done on a roof, which would involve scaffolding and all sorts. Now, me and my stupidity, I guess, didn't check those bits out. So again, kind of talking from personal experience, it's good to know and ask the agent what work's been done to the building. I say if you're buying a flat, has are things regularly serviced? When was the roof last done? When was the communal parking driveway last done or resurfaced? All those sort of things. So again, it's kind of question, and really push your agent, because we're not perfect. Jack and I are definitely not perfect. Just ask our wives. We're not always going to know the answer to these questions, but we will ask the owner of the property, and we'll try and get hold of the freeholder or the management company for you. But keep pressing us to make sure you get all the answers so you're able to make an informed decision. And that's certainly what Jack and I want to be able to help with, who's just disappeared off. So I'm guessing he's getting a phone call coming through, but he's back. There you go. So really important. So thank you for the sinking fund. So I guess the next question, Jack, I'm just going to quiz you if that's all right, because this is sort of your baby. So on the leasehold, we've sort of said let the shackles are off. He's getting another phone call now. You can hear me. The shackles are off. You've got with a leasehold property, that the roof's going to be taken care of by a management company or that internal sort of areas. What responsibilities would I have if I owned a leasehold flat? What would I still need to do?
Yeah, that's all written into the lease. The leases are really quite can be quite in depth. So, and that will be something that your solicitor will go through on your behalf to look through, because there's so many things that are included in there, and it's really key to have a good look through that, because there might be things that you're not wanting to take on or responsibility for. But in terms of what you're responsible for, typically, and it does differ from leasehold property to leasehold property, but basically is what you've got. So if you've got your 2-bedroom flat, ground floor and a patio, for example, it will probably say in the lease that you maintain that patio area. You have to maintain the windows in it, within your flat. So if you want to update to double glazing, and again, if you're buying something that's grade 2 listed or something, then there will be complications within that lease that may not allow you to do that. But typically you maintain what is basically yours, so what you buy within that lease, and that's what you take care of. But again, it does differ from property to property, and as Mike says, there can be some really complicated things. So you could buy a freehold house that might have a leasehold garage. That's another whole world of of things to think about. So there's so many different things that you're kind of responsible for, and you need to look after. So again, it's just about asking really the conveyancer and the agent about how that works, and what you're legally responsible for, and also what you can look after. Mike and I just and the team at Uckfield just moved a lady in, Mrs. P, shall we call her, that moved into Millington Court, and she absolutely loved it. But she was coming from something much bigger. It was a big move for her. She was moving into a leasehold property. There was a relatively short lease with that, so that lease had to be extended when she actually purchased it. She has now moved in, but that was a lengthy process again. So the solicitors had to actually extend that lease back to, I think it was 125 years. For when she moved in, for that to be done, because obviously otherwise she would have had to have lived there for 2 years before she could do that. And for Mrs. P, she wanted to personalise the kind of outside space. So we had to find out, Mike and I, from the management company, what could actually be done. Could she put hanging baskets out there? Could she use her garden area as she wanted to? Could she have a dog? Could she have a cat? So all those things, they may seem really small, but actually for a lot of people they're really big things, and it's really key to kind of find out about what you're allowed to do, as well as what you're responsible for.
Absolutely. Cool. So I guess just to recap then, so going back to the beginning, so as we spoke, freehold properties start off with your most traditional sort of purchase. Like we said, lock, stock and barrel, you know what you own. The great thing is you've got no management company to answer for, or any freeholder. You are the freeholder, you answer to yourselves. I guess the negative is that if things start going wrong, it starts costing money, but that is the joy of being a homeowner. But like we said, leasehold properties doesn't mean that leaseholds are a bad thing. You get the comfort of owning a leasehold property knowing that there are management companies that take care of this sort of thing, and especially if you get a flat that's got a really good management company, and also, like anywhere, really great neighbours, you all sort of chip in on making sure things are kept clean and tidy. As we said, leasehold properties are traditionally flats, blocks of flats that have either been converted or purpose built. But to break it down a little bit further, Jack, I think it was you mentioned, and I've got some knowledge, also personal knowledge on owning one. Let's talk about share of freehold. Let's have, because it's something that we mentioned there. So that's something completely different, and kind of takes a little bit of the freehold and a little bit of the leasehold sections and rolls it into one. So I don't know if you want to start, and then I'll rudely interrupt you as I always do.
Sorry, Mike. Is your flat that you've got, is that a share of freehold?
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't do that.
Yeah.
So basically, as Mike says, so a share of freehold is basically exactly that. You own a share of that freehold, and that is broke down into sort of parts, really. So if you've got, let's keep things simple. I guess if you've got a purpose-built block of flats with four.
Use my example, Jack.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I told you I'd really interrupt you. I mean, that took all of 10 seconds for me to do that, so that was quite impressive.
But if you're the owner of something like that, that's great. That's the way to get information.
The flat, my first ever flat that I bought, so the one that needed all the roof work when I first moved in, I've managed to, thanks to my wife being my mortgage consultant, keep hold of that flat, and I now rent it out. Now that flat is a block of three flats in a converted Victorian building down here where I live in Bexhill, and I own the middle flat, and I have a third share of freehold. So the freehold, there are 3 flats, very simply, each of us own a third of it. Now there is an overall lease on all the flats, so I've got 980 odd years to run on my lease, so it should just about outlive me, I reckon. Possibly not Adrian, because he keeps on going, but yeah, so certainly we've got a nice long lease on that. Now my responsibility as a share of freeholder, whilst I still have the lease, I as that share of freeholder have a third responsibility. So when that roof needed doing, we all split, all of us, the 3 of us owners split that overall bill in 3, and that's the easiest way to pay it. The responsibility of a share of freeholder means that you become the manager, of sense. So I co-manage that block of flats with the other 2 owners. We have a service charge fund that we put into every month. So us share of freeholders, we each put £100, in a month, and that is slowly building up so that if anything future comes up, we can pay it. But we also have an extended responsibility, for example, buildings insurance. So again, we pay for the insurance for the whole building, and that's split in 3. So that's how it works for me personally. But that's sort of in a nutshell. You still have a lease attached to the building, but also you have a joint responsibility as a share of freeholder. The great thing is you own a little bit of that entire building. So for me, I've got that third share, which is great. But again, it comes with those responsibilities. So if, like Jack, if the driveway really needs redoing, if the roof needs redoing, if the chimney needs redoing, all things I'm quite versed in, unfortunately, stupidly buying an older property. But it means you share, you do share that responsibility. But as a share freeholder, I've been able to also become a landlord and rent my flat out, which is fantastic. But that, being a landlord, is a whole other episode, way beyond our knowledge, and that's one we'll hand over to Stephanie and Ainsley in the lettings department to discuss. But that gives you an idea of share freehold. So sorry to interrupt you within
that's fine.
Seconds. I will let you do. You can do common hold. That's you can definitely. It's the final phrase. If you want to have a chat about common hold, it's just our fourth phrase.
Say as well is, as Mike was just saying, then having that share of freehold. I think it's really key to, one thing that has been a positive for one particular client of ours at the moment, at Buxford Grange. So if you own a leasehold property, or you're buying a leasehold property, it might be that at some point in the future, or at the point of purchasing, if everyone is in agreement, that you can buy the share of the freehold. So it might not be that it's always a leasehold property. So it might be that, I know when Mike bought his, he bought it as a share of freehold, but it could have been that those flats in that Victorian conversion could have been leasehold flats. And then later on, the three different parties agreed to, but they wanted to purchase it as a share of freehold. So that's something you can do. And again, with this particular current vendor that we've got, it wasn't actually a costly process at all. So really wasn't. So it might be that might work better for you, or speaking to the other leaseholders in the whatever the situation is in the flat or the converted building. It might be that you can do that. So that's a really key thing to, again, listen out for and see if that works for you, because it might be that purchase initially is leasehold, but then later on it might change. I don't know if that wasn't the case with yours, was it? You did buy it?
No. So I bought it standard as a share of freehold. I kind of knew what I was getting into. Again, it helps with the service charge side of things on a share of freehold as well. Is agreed by the three shareholders, which is quite nice, and that is up for debate. So we, myself and the other two owners in the block I've got, we all agreed £100 a month would be about right. I know other friends who own share of freehold properties who put in more into a sinking fund. I know one friend who hasn't got a sinking fund at all, and they just pay for service and maintenance as and when. So again, it's decided by those around you. And I say, I'm again very, very lucky, got great neighbours, or had great neighbours when I lived there, and we've got a really good relationship, which means that we've got this sinking fund, so that anything that comes up, we can jump on, which is brilliant. But to not bore you too much over the joys of freehold and leasehold properties, we'll just very quickly sort of recap. So as we said, very briefly, freehold, lock, stock and barrel, you know what you're getting into, you know what your responsibilities are, is everything you see. With a leasehold property, the big tip there, as we said, ask as many questions as possible. What is the service charge? What is the length of lease? What is the ground rent? What does the service charge cover? Is there a sinking fund? Also importantly, what work has been done to the property recently? Has the roof been done recently? When was that last done? Has the car park been resurfaced? There's so many different questions. Can you have pets? That's a huge one. We all love our animals. As you know, I've got my tortoise Jack, and my 5-month-old son, who's a bit of an animal. Jack's got an entire zoo where he lives. Again, it's important if you're buying a leasehold property to find out what you can and can't do as well. So question. Push the agents to get the answers to those questions. If they're good enough at their jobs, they would have already asked those questions ahead of time and should know. Again, like I said, we're not perfect, so we will find out for you though, and that's the main thing, is keep pressing us. And then there's the share of freehold, which would say combines the two, freehold and leasehold. But I think in terms of that side of things, that's everything from me. On this subject, because it's so in depth, if you have any additional comments, comment below, send us an email, jack@raylandorange.co.uk, mike@raylandorange.co.uk, and if you've got any more in-depth questions, we'll do our best to answer them and get the answers for you. But I think that's everything on that.
Yeah, I think so. We could touch on common hold really, really quickly because I know Mike mentioned
Sorry.
that.
Yes.
No, that's all right.
Sorry.
I think, and we will touch on it. So it's a more, I guess to break it down, it's a more modern method, and I guess it's kind of somewhere in the middle. It sort of. Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to do it. So you don't have where a lease has a length of time, you don't have a length of time with a common hold. So you could have a common hold flat where it's actually a freehold, flat within a block of flats. So the land has got to be freehold land, and then you can go for your sort of. So yeah, it kind of sits in the middle of a share of freehold and a leasehold, I would say, something like that. So it's more of a lock, stock, and barrel, as we're using that term today. Purchase. You don't have that length of time attached to it, but there are other complications as there are with leases to look into. So I know, in my career of selling properties, selling common hold or even a freehold flat, I think I've only ever done twice in my time of doing estate agency. Yeah, one was in sort of the outskirts of Linfield, and I think the other one was in Tunbridge Wells. But yeah, I haven't come across them that much, if I'm honest. But it is kind of somewhere in between the two. There are certain complications with it, but as I say, there isn't that time duration of ownership attached to it, which is quite good. So it's a more modern twist, I guess, on a freehold purchase. But yeah, that kind of sums that up. But yeah, I think, as Mike says, we're kind of coming to the end of the classroom, and keep an eye out for next week's episode. We're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to maybe have a bit of an argument with Mike, I think, next week.
It's been a while, to be fair. We haven't had a good row for a while, so I think we need to get into a good row. Yeah, 100%. As we said, thank you for all the positive comments. We have had some negative comments, so we've tried to change the way we've done things today. We take on board all feedback. That's not just about these videos, that's as agents as well. We are all about the feedback. So please keep your comments coming. Keep your likes especially coming, and the thumbs up, and all the views as well. I think we've had over 300 views now across the 3 episodes. So we're really, really pleased and very thankful to you guys for watching. We hope these videos are helping. And
I think that's a sweet point. As Mike says, it's really we hope that they're helping and they're giving advice and they're shining a bit of light on a dark time that we're all in. And as Mike and I said, we're busy and we just want to keep in touch with you to let you know we're here and offer any advice that we can. And it's all positive. So let's support each other. I am updating Instagram later on today to just say, be kind, be nice, let's support each other during this time that we're all going through. I'm never nice to Mike and I won't be, but I mean, as a whole, it's,
But talking of that, and I'm sorry, I've got to do this. We've tried to be formal in this episode just to change things up. I can't do it. I simply can't do it. I put a shirt and tie on. That's about as best I can do. Jack, will you please stand up for us?
No, well, I don't know if that's okay. I'm wearing shorts basically, but yes. So yeah, but
I think we'll move on from that and say thank you for watching.
It's my
Goodbye.
Going in later, but let's move on from that. Thanks, guys. Cool.